Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our WVABLE special topic webinar, WVABLE and SSI, Supplemental Security Income, the Perfect Partnership. WVABLE is partnering with the Social Security Administration to offer this webinar workshop. So before we get started, let's cover a few housekeeping items and some important reminders. So the WVABLE special topic webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to the public for viewing on demand. By joining the webinar, you automatically consent to such recordings. So the slide deck for today's webinar is extensive and it will be made available to all those that are registered. The intention of our slide deck, it has lots of great content and information, and we want to make sure that you have that available to you to use as a resource. At this time, if you haven't already done so, please mute your microphones and turn off your videos. This will help to eliminate any background noise and movement during the webinar. ASL interpretation is included for today's webinar. I'd like to welcome our ASL interpreter, Ashley Turley. Her video tile is being spotlighted and will remain located in the upper right-hand side of your screen. We also have Sherry Crump with the State Treasurer's Office with us to provide tech support. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please feel free to reach out to Sherry via the chat and she will be monitoring the chat box. Also, we welcome your questions. We have included a Q&A portion towards the end of the webinar. At that time, feel free to unmute your microphones to ask your questions, or you may enter your questions in the chat box at any time, and we will get to those questions during the Q&A portion. Social Security Administration disclaimer. The information is current at the time of this presentation, but Social Security policy is subject to change. Please visit ssa.gov for up-to-date information on their programs. So today's presenters include myself, Roxanne Clay. I'm the director of the WVABLE Savings Program. We also have Kimberly Stephens. Kimberly Stephens is a Social Security Public Affairs Specialist for 27 offices in West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania area. She has worked for Social Security for more than 20 years and has held several positions, including Supplemental Security Income Claims Specialist. Before that, she served in the United States Air Force and completed her Bachelor of Science in Education at Ohio University. During that time, she developed a love for teaching and serving others. She was a high school mathematics teacher and enjoyed the challenge and satisfaction of working with teenagers. Social Security was a natural transition for her to continue serving the public. She is passionate about ensuring the public understands Social Security's programs and services. I will tell you, I'm incredibly excited to have Kim as a co-presenter and partnering with us to provide this webinar for you today. So during today's webinar, we have lots of things we're going to cover with you. During the first portion, I'm going to provide a very high level and brief overview of WVABLE, how the accounts work and their key benefits. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and she is going to provide information about what is Social Security, what is SSI, and who is eligible. And then she's going to discuss briefly about the impact of WVABLE on SSI eligibility and reporting. Then we're going to walk you through three real-life scenarios. We're going to include some common myths, challenges, and best practices for each of those scenarios as it relates to Social Security policy and WVABLE. Then we have time for Q&A. And then we are going to provide you some slides that has some valuable program resources for both SSI and WVABLE. So to start off, what is ABLE? So know that WVABLE is actually made possible by federal legislation called the ABLE Act. ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience, and the ABLE Act was passed in 2014. What the ABLE Act did is it created savings and investment accounts specifically designed for individuals with disabilities. Many of you are likely familiar with 529 College Savings Program, so know that ABLE is a sister program. We are in the tax code, a new section 529A. And of course, where ABLE is different, it is designed specifically for individuals with disabilities. The rule is for any of those individuals that are receiving public benefits, SSI, Medicaid, SNAP, and HUD. The rule is you cannot have more than $2,000 in assets, otherwise you lose eligibility for those programs. Now you can with an ABLE account. So ABLE allows for individuals with disabilities to save funds in an ABLE account without it impacting their eligibility for these public benefit programs. SSI, Medicaid, SNAP, and HUD. Now, the ABLE Act also gave states the mechanisms to create their own ABLE programs. Currently, we have 47 states plus DC that has an ABLE program. So what is WVABLE? WVABLE is West Virginia's ABLE plan. Our program is administered by the West Virginia State Treasurer's Office. Our program launched February the 9th of 2018. It is offered to the West Virginia resident through a partnership with the Ohio STABLE program. So throughout the presentation, and what you've already heard me mention is ABLE, WVABLE, and STABLE. So no, they're all the same. ABLE refers to the federal legislation, WVABLE is West Virginia's ABLE program, and STABLE is the account, the name of the account that the individual will enroll and own. STABLE is also the name of our program manager. Know that Ohio was the first state in the nation to establish and develop their ABLE program back in 2016. And once it was established, they opened it up and they invited other states to partner. So STABLE is a national program made up of 12 partner states. So it is one of the most widely used ABLE programs nationwide with highest number of account numbers and highest assets under management. So we do feel incredibly fortunate to be part of the STABLE program. So let's talk about additional benefits of a STABLE account. First of all, the account is owned by the individual with a disability, but they can have only one STABLE account, okay? Contributions into a STABLE account can come from any source, and it's not considered income as it relates to public benefits, including SSI, Medicaid, SNAP, and HUD. ABLE accounts is providing financial independence for individuals with disabilities. Now, through an ABLE account, they have an opportunity to save and invest. ABLE accounts, they are eliminating that routine spend down to stay below that $2,000 asset limit. We hear that quite frequently. So instead of spending down, individuals can now move those funds into their ABLE account and allow those funds to build, whether they're using the funds to pay for everyday living, or whether they're saving for an emergency fund, or they're saving for the long term. Individuals that do receive SSI, they may save up to $100,000 in their ABLE account. Anything above that does start counting towards the $2,000 asset limit. If for those folks that are receiving Medicaid, SNAP, and HUD, know that those programs don't have this $100,000 limit, only for those receiving or that want to receive SSI. STABLE accounts offer tax benefits. So you've heard me mention that STABLE offers savings and investment opportunities. So the earnings from the investments grow tax-free as long as the funds are spent on qualified disability expenses. That is a game changer for individuals with disabilities. They're now able to save and invest just like they could in a Smart 529, that's West Virginia's 529 program, and the earnings grow tax-free. For West Virginia taxpayers, when they are contributing into the WVABLE STABLE account, they may take a deduction for the contribution made into the WVABLE account from their West Virginia state income tax returns. Okay, and then there's also the Savers Credit. Additional program features of a WVABLE account is the program does incentivize employment for individuals with disabilities, and we're going to talk more about that in an upcoming slide. There are low account maintenance fees and asset-based fee for owning a STABLE account. There is a gift giving tool that makes gift giving by family and friends easy. We're going to talk more about that too. Stable Account offers a stable mobile app to manage the account and to access your funds while on the go. Additionally, anyone that owns a stable account has access to a free stable Visa debit card. That free is for the West Virginia residents that owns a WVABLE account. So let's talk about eligibility. Who is eligible for WVABLE? So you do have to be a West Virginia resident, and the onset of the disability would have had to have occurred before the age of 26. Note, this is the onset of the symptoms. This is not the disability diagnosis. Okay, and then you have to have one of the following criteria: that the individual is eligible or entitled to receive SSI or SSDI due to the disability or blindness. Note too, you do not have to be receiving SSI in order to be eligible for ABLE. Okay, the second criteria is that you would need to have a condition listed on Social Security Administration's list of compassionate allowances conditions, or you can be eligible and qualify through what's called self-certification. This is simply the current treating physician or the physician that provided your diagnosis. They will certify your disability diagnosis. And then coming up January 1 of 2026, just in a few months, the eligibility criteria changes. So currently, onset of disability would have had to have occurred before age 26. So that is increasing to before age 46. This will impact an additional 6 million individuals nationwide who will be eligible for an ABLE account. And these are folks whose disability occurred at a later age. Enrollment takes place at WVABLE.com website. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner a hamburger stack, and you'll see the button for opening an account. The enrollment is not an application where you're approved or denied. It's an enrollment in which you're supplying information for questions that are asked. For the account beneficiary, who is the account owner, the individual with a disability, and the ALR, the authorized legal representative who is enrolling and managing on behalf of the account beneficiary. You do need an email address. And then the second part of the enrollment is the contribution of a minimum of $25. That creates the opening balance. That is not a fee. Enrollment can be completed by the individual with a disability. Again, we call them the account owner or the account beneficiary. In the case where that beneficiary is a child, or if it's an adult who may not want to enroll by themselves, or they may not have the capacity, they may just want some assistance. Then an authorized legal representative, we refer to them as an ALR, they may do so on behalf of the beneficiary. And an ALR can be any one of the following relationships to the beneficiary: an agent acting under a power of attorney, a conservator, legal guardian that's been approved by the courts, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a grandparent, or the Social Security rep payee. How do you get money in your account? So it's all of these ways. You can link a current checking or savings account within the Stable Account platform and move funds over via EFT, electronic funds transfer. You may set up direct deposit of Social Security benefits, including SSI, or payroll direct deposit. Payroll would include when the beneficiary is working, or if there's a parent who wants to contribute a portion of their payroll earnings directly into the Stable account. You can roll over funds from a 529 education savings account. You can mail in a check to Stable account to make check contributions. We also have the gifting tool feature to make contributions directly via a gifting link. And then we have contributions from an inheritance, insurance settlements, special needs trust distributions, SSI back pay funds. Those are all ways and all items that can be funded into the Stable account. And then how do you get money out of the account? So those linked checking or savings accounts that you have linked to make EFT transfers, that's also how you can make withdrawals, is you move those funds back over to that linked account. You can also request for Stable to issue a check to the account beneficiary, to the ALR, or to a third party. And then we also have the Stable Visa debit card. This is free to all West Virginia ABLE account holders. You do have to request it, though. It does not come automatic. For how much money can be deposited into a WVABLE stable account. So the IRS sets these limits for 2025. The standard contribution limit is $19,000, and that would be coming from all sources. For the account beneficiary that is employed, they may contribute up to $15,060 of their employment earnings for a grand total of $34,060 for the year 2025. And then there's a lifetime limit of $555,000. How can your funds be spent? So withdrawals should be spent on what's called qualified disability expenses. What a qualified disability expense is that it must relate to the disability and it must help to maintain or improve the beneficiary's health, their independence, or quality of life. No, there's not a list. They did not want it to be restrictive. So what you see on the slide are expense categories in which the expenses would fall under. So for example, food, housing, transportation, Uber, gym membership fees. I always like to say, think of it in terms of what would not qualify. So gambling, tobacco, alcohol use, or giving the money away. Some important numbers and special considerations to keep in mind that we have not covered yet. To own a stable account, the fee is $20 per year, or it's billed $5 per quarter. This fee has been reduced since the inception of the program, so we're excited that the fee has been recently reduced, and we look for the fee to continue to be reduced. But currently it is $5 per quarter. There is an asset-based fee on the earnings portion from the investments, which is between 0.19 and 0.33%. And for those individuals that do receive SSI or they plan to apply for SSI, know that balances over $100,000 do count as a resource. Actually, it's counted towards that $2,000 resource limit. Know that the $100,000 cap does not apply to Medicaid, SNAP, and HUD benefits. I did mention this before, that there is a West Virginia state income tax deduction for all contributions made by the West Virginia resident and taxpayer up to the annual contribution limit. And then for West Virginia, there is no Medicaid clawback upon the passing of the beneficiary unless as required by federal requirements, which is called the West Virginia State Recovery. Okay. That was a very high-level overview of WVABLE. Know that I do monthly webinars that's open to the public. They're an hour long, in which anyone that would like to learn more detailed information, I would invite you to attend one of those, and I'll be talking about how to do that and register at the end of the webinar. But next, I would like to turn things over to Kim Stephens. She's going to provide lots more insights into what SSI is, who is eligible, and the impact of WVABLE on SSI eligibility and reporting.
Hi, thanks, Roxanne. Thanks for the invitation to collaborate with you on this webinar. It's exciting to get this information out there. Roxanne did a great overview of WVABLE and the features that go along with WVABLE accounts. And so I'm going to provide you with the other piece of that. They do link together, and that is that Supplemental Security Income Program. That's going to be my primary focus today. We refer to it as SSI. So what is SSI? It's a program that is administered by the Social Security Administration. It's for adults who are under the age of 65 with a disability or blindness, children with a disability or blindness, or an individual who's over the age of 65. If you're over the age of 65, we do not have to determine a disability, okay? So in addition to those kind of age categories and blindness or disability criteria, It also is for individuals who have limited income and resources. So it is a needs-based program. Other factors to consider with the SSI program: an individual receiving another form of payment, perhaps Social Security, could potentially qualify for SSI as well. That's why it's called a supplement. It's designed to supplement your income. So you might find an individual receiving maybe veterans benefits or other forms of payments, but also receiving SSI. Monthly payments for the SSI program depend on your income, your living arrangements, things you own. We're going to refer to those as assets or resources, and then some other factors that we will discuss later in the presentation. So although it is a federal program and it is administered by the Social Security Administration, it is not funded through Social Security tax dollars. The SSI program is derived from general tax revenue. However, Social Security does administer the program. All right, just to give you, if you weren't aware, what we call the SSI payment is actually referred to as a federal benefit rate. The maximum an individual can receive on SSI for 2025 is $967 per month. If you're an eligible couple, the SSI payment is $1,450 per month. Just to give you kind of an idea of what the income guidelines are and what a person with no other form of income under the resource limit would be receiving from the SSI program. Okay. For resources, income is also an important factor when it comes to SSI, and we're going to get more into that later. But with WVABLE, it directly connects with resources. So Roxanne had mentioned that the WVABLE for SSI purposes, we exclude the funds in an ABLE account up to $100,000. So what is the standard resource limit for SSI? For an individual, it's countable assets of $2,000 or more. And if for a couple, an eligible SSI couple, it would be $3,000 or more. However, as we've learned, if those assets are in an ABLE account, we do exclude the resources in that account up to $100,000. But if you had this funds in a standard checking account, in cash, or some other forms of resources that we will discuss here in a little while, if it's above that limit, you would not qualify for the SSI program. All right, so how does SSI view ABLE accounts? What's the connection here? So you're going to hear us repeat a lot of common terminology throughout the presentation today, but for Social Security, when it comes to ABLE, we will disregard the first $100,000 in that account. Only assets above the $100,000 are going to be a countable resource. So as soon as you go to 101,000, actually 100,001 cent, let's put it that way, that starts the countable resource aspect of that. If the ABLE balance exceeds $100,000 by any amount that causes you to exceed that SSI resource limit, that $2,000 if you're an individual or $3,000 as a couple, whether it's the ABLE account alone that exceeds that or a combination of other resources that exceeds that, the SSI payment will be stopped. We call that suspending the account until the countable resources are below the allowable limit. Any person can contribute to an ABLE account for an eligible SSI recipient. These are considered gifts if they're made directly into that ABLE account. And when a gift is deposited directly into the ABLE account, it's excluded as countable income towards the SSI recipient. So we won't count that as income towards that individual, provided it goes directly into that account. Now, distributions or withdrawals from an ABLE account, what Roxanne referred to as a qualified disability expense or QDE, when they're withdrawn from that account to be used for those purposes that she mentioned, it is not counted as taxable income, okay? It's actually considered a conversion of a resource. So we're not going to count that against you for SSI based on your monthly income amount. So it's not counted as taxable income. I want to add to that as well. Roxanne had mentioned that the WVABLE account allows individuals to invest. So there are various options of investment tools within the WVABLE account. Obviously, those will earn interest and dividends. Now, I do want to mention interest and dividends that accumulate within the WVABLE account also are not counted as taxable income. So you don't have to worry that if you're accruing interest in that ABLE account, it's still not income towards the SSI recipient. Okay, it is counted towards that resource as the $100,000, but it's not counted as income. Anyone receiving SSI and they establish an ABLE account, they do need to report that they have created that account. That is part of the SSI reporting responsibilities. Now there you'll see kind of like a big star there. That is actually a hyperlink to the resource page concerning specifically ABLE accounts as it relates to SSI. And I think you will find going there and looking through that material very helpful when you're exploring the relationship between SSI and ABLE accounts. All right, well, we're going to head on through into some real life scenarios. We've given you the WVABLE parameters, the details behind that program. And I've talked a little bit about the outline of the SSI program. Obviously, Roxanne and I were talking about this earlier. We could go on for hours about these programs, but we want to, respect your time today, and we want to provide you, a high level format, high level information about these programs today. So let's put into practice what we see on a daily basis working with SSI and working with the WVABLE program. All right, in this scenario, we have a 5-year-old who's diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and they are nonverbal. They're living with mom and dad. They're both working parents, so they have income coming into the household. Now, based on the parents' income, the child is not eligible for SSI because the parents are over the income guidelines. So you're wondering, well, if they're not eligible, how would this relate to SSI and WVABLE? And this is about preparing for the future for a child who is diagnosed with a disability. Some questions that we're going to address during this particular scenario is, how does SSA define disability for children? What are the SSI income and resource guidelines in this specific scenario? And why is the WVABLE important for families with children with disabilities? So let's kind of dive into this scenario. So for children, the SSI eligibility factors, of course, they're under the age of 18. That is the definition of a child by Social Security rules, provided that child is not married and not considered a head of a household. That child has limited income, limited resources, and has either a disability or blindness. Now, when we're looking at SSI, we also have to consider for a child income and resources. So let's talk a little bit about income. What is income and how is it counted for the SSI program? So we look at income in different ways. First, you have earned income. This is typically what most of us look at when we go to work. It's our wages. If we have self-employment, it's our net earnings. It could be types of royalties or honorarias or payments from a sheltered workshop. So it's basically what you're working for to receive. And that is counted very differently for SSI purposes than what we would call unearned income. This is income that is not wages. This is payments received maybe from Social Security, what we call SSDI, or it could be Social Security retirement or childhood disability benefits. It could be a pension, could be state disability payments, unemployment benefits, interest, income, dividends, the list goes on there. It can also be child support, which is considered unearned income. Now, we also look at some things that may not be monetary, but it's an exchange, and we call this in-kind support income. So, in-kind income is receiving something essential for living, such as shelter and utilities, for either free or less than what we consider fair market value. So if someone is giving you a place to rent or giving you a place to live rent free, that's a form of income called in-kind support and maintenance, and it would reduce your SSI payment. We also look at deemed income. So this is part of income, whether it's from a spouse that you live with or your parents, in some cases, certain situations, a sponsor of a non-citizen, and which we use to compute the SSI benefit amount. And the scenario that we provided you today, the parents were working, and so their wages were considered deemed income to the child that we mentioned in our scenario. So we counted a portion of that income towards the child. Now, there is something called a deeming chart that has those guidelines in it, but contact Social Security for more information about income and the guidelines, because they can be very detailed. As you can see, it depends on whether it's earned, unearned, it's in the form of in-kind support and maintenance, and you could have a mixture of those. So don't assume that a person is above the income guidelines. Get an official decision from Social Security, because there's so many variables to income and how it is counted for SSI purposes. Now, income for children. If a child lives in the household with a parent or both parents, we deem the income from the parents towards that child. So SSA considers parents' income. Like I said, it's referred to as deeming. You might hear us use that phrase. But once the child turns 18, this no longer applies. We no longer count parents' income or resources for that matter. Let's say the child's not living with a parent. If a child is not living with a parent, then SSA only considers the income being paid directly to that child. For example, child support, okay, or maybe foster care payments. But we do not consider, if they're not living with parents, the other forms of income in the household. Only payments and income paid directly to the child, okay? So resources. So what we're going to look at if we're taking the application in this scenario is what type of resources and what's countable and then is not countable. For SSI, a resource is the value of a person's belongings such as cash, other personal property, real property that the individual owns, has the right or authority or power to convert to cash, and is not legally restricted from using that form of a resource for income and maintenance. Now, so let's put this into practical terms. What does that mean for us? So we look at it as a resource. What is countable and what can we exclude? Vehicles is a common resource. We do exclude one vehicle. It's called your primary vehicle. If you have additional vehicles, we would count the value of the additional vehicles towards that resource limit. Property, your primary residence is excluded. We don't count that as a resource regardless of the value. If you have other property that you do not live on, so what we refer to as non-home property, that is a countable resource, and we do have to look at the value of that property, and it is counted towards the asset limit. Life insurance policies is a common one. If you have a term life insurance policy, it has no cash surrender value, it's excluded. However, if you have a whole policy that does have cash surrender value, it could be counted as a countable resource. Other countable resources would be stocks, bonds, mutual funds, funds in savings accounts, checkings accounts, your standard banking accounts, and cash set aside. So if you have a cash just set aside and saved, that is a countable resource. However, if you have prepaid burial contracts, so if you have cemetery lots, let's say, or you have a prepaid burial contract with a funeral home, that is an excluded resource. We would not count that. And then, of course, the one that we're focusing and highlighting today is an ABLE account. We do exclude that up to that $100,000 limit before we would count the resources in that ABLE account. So we do look at income. We're looking at resources when it comes to determining eligibility for an individual for SSI. Now, resource limitations for children, and this gets a little confusing because I mentioned that the resource limit for an individual was $2,000 and for a couple was $3,000. We kind of have to apply that same criteria with a household. So if a child is living with their parents, if it's a two-parent household, the parents have a $3,000 resource limit, while the child with the disabling condition or blindness has a $2,000 resource limit. So that's an and. They can both have that, okay? If it's a one-parent household, that one-parent household has the $2,000 resource limit, then the child also gets a $2,000 resource limit. So again, if the child is living in a home that's not with their parents, we only look at the child's resources and they're subject to the $2,000 resource limit. Because this can get a little confusing, let me give you a really quick example based on our scenario today. So in scenario one, we have the 5-year-old child who's living with their parents, and just a quick, they would pass the resource test in this scenario, even though they don't meet the income one. We're going to look at the resource part here. So the child doesn't say in this scenario does not have any resources. The parents applied for SSI on behalf of the child. The parents have $4,000 in a bank account. So what Social Security does is we take that $4,000, we subtract what the resource limit is for a couple, and that's $3,000. So technically they are over the resource limit by $1,000. However, we can deem that $1,000 to the child, child with disabilities, and we can say that child has $1,000 of countable resources. And so since mom and dad now are under the resource limit, the child is under the $2,000 resource limit. As far as assets go, the child meets the eligibility requirement. Okay, hope that kind of clears things up about how we look at resources when a parent to child scenario. All right, let's move on because we've looked at income, we've looked at resources, if the child's living with a parent, not living with the parents. How do we look at the disability decision, and why is this important in this case, even though they're not SSI eligible? So who makes that decision? So the disability determination services, they're referred to as DDS. They are state agencies responsible for developing the medical evidence and making the initial determination as to whether a person is considered disabled by Social Security rules or blind under the Social Security Act. How do we define Social Security disability for children? So with children, it is a little bit different than an adult. So the child must have a medical condition or a combination of conditions that results in what they call marked and severe functional limitations. And this must severely limit the child's activities. The condition must affect the child for at least 12 months or as a result in death. So it might be a terminal condition that the child has. Now, with all that being said, when you go to our website, if you are curious about the listings or impairments of what would be determined a disability for children based on Social Security rulings, you can go to this link here. When you get the presentation, it'll show you that. But you can also type in on SSA.gov Blue Book. Blue Book is the guide that we use to look at the factors within a condition to whether or not someone is determined disabled or not disabled. So you can see the categories here. When you go to our website, you can click on these main categories and then it will take you into the specific conditions that you might be looking for, and it'll list that criteria. So if you were ever curious about that, this is where you would go to find that information. And in this case, where this individual is not eligible for SSI at this time, It's important to know this for future planning purposes, especially if this is the condition that will be with them for the rest of their lives and you're considering opening an ABLE account. How do you determine that disability? Are they disabled or not? Because again, as Roxanne mentioned, you don't have to be receiving SSI or SSDI, but the entitlement is there, okay? So you can look here as an indicator as to whether or not the child could be considered disabled, even though they did not have that official disability decision. All right. Roxanne mentioned this in her portion of the presentation about compassionate allowances. So if the condition is listed on Social Security's listing of compassionate allowances, these are conditions that are usually severe. They're usually rare disorders that could affect adults and children. If the condition that the child has is listed on a compassionate allowance listing, even though they may not be receiving payments or benefits from Social Security, that's an indicator that they're eligible to establish that ABLE account as a child now, and you can start that savings process. So I want to highlight that because that might be helpful when determining that disability criteria, even though you may not have an official Social Security decision from us, especially in this scenario we're talking about today. So some key takeaways for this scenario here. Let's kind of reiterate what we were talking about. So we have a 5-year-old child who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder who was living with mom and dad and their working parents. And the child became ineligible for the SSI program because the parent's income was too high. So some things you want to consider in this scenario is that if a parent or the child themselves is over the income or resource limit, Social Security will deny the claim before the disability decision is ever made, okay? So we look at income and assets first. If they pass that criteria, then we take a full disability claim. However, if they exceed that income or asset limit, we never actually take the disability claim and get a disability decision from DDS, that state agency. So you want to remember that. If the parent's income or resources, whatever they were denied for, if that changes, if there's a loss of income or anything of that nature, you can reapply for SSI anytime. You're not limited to your number of applications or when you can file. You want to remember a denied SSI claim does not mean the child's not disabled, okay? Especially for when we're considering whether to open a WVABLE account. You got to remember that aspect of it. They could very well still meet the disabling criteria that I mentioned in the Blue Book or the compassionate allowance listing that I mentioned. When a child attains the age of 18, we no longer look at parents' income and resources. So at that time, we look at the 18-year-old and we look at their income and resources. That usually is an indicator that they may want to file for benefits when they turn 18. And oftentimes children with disabilities, especially disabilities that proceed with them into adulthood, and they're not eligible due to parents' income, oftentimes at 18, they do apply for SSI benefits because we look at their own income and assets at that time and no longer their parents. So that's something also you want to remember. If your story kind of matches with scenario one, those are some key features to that. Now, Roxanne's got some key takeaways with them concerning the WVABLE account before we get into the next scenario.
Thank you, Kim. And I will just mention this, that one of the most common misconceptions that I hear when I'm talking with parents and families, when I'm at events, when I get phone calls, is they think that they have to be receiving SSI in order to be eligible for ABLE account. And as Kim explained, you do not have to be eligible for SSI. Again, it goes back to that disability. Does the child have a disability? Of course, that meets Social Security standards. And so what I've done here, as far as the WVABLE key takeaways, of course, it's specific to the scenario in which you have a child who is, and the family is not receiving SSI because the parents have exceeded the income limit. And so some key takeaways, and again, we are making these slides available so that you'll have these to reference. But to start out with, generally speaking, just know the ability to save and invest in the ABLE account without losing eligibility for needs-based benefits. So basically, we always encourage families to create and use the ABLE account. Start when that child is young. This is going to allow you to shelter the savings so that when and if you want to apply for SSI down the road, or even Medicaid, SNAP, and HUD, you're going to have those funds already in the ABLE account. They're going to be sheltered, and you don't have to worry about meeting the asset test piece to being eligible for the public benefits, including SSI. The other key takeaway here is the WVABLE account is owned by the individual with a disability, even if the parent is managing the account. So the parent would, again, we encourage them to enroll when the child is young as they can, so you can start allowing those funds to build. Even though the parent will be enrolling and they'll be the ALR, the authorized legal representative, the account is still in the child's name. The child is the one who owns the account. And then, as Kim mentioned, just to reiterate this piece, that when the child turns 18, Social Security considers the income and assets of that 18-year-old. It's no longer the parent. So we do get this a lot, and this is a big topic in the disability community, is that transitioning that child or that adolescent from 18 to beyond, when they're starting to plan for their future beyond high school. What paths are they going to take? Are they going to do additional vocational training, job training? Are they going to further their education? Are they going to go to college or a trade school? But again, they can apply for SSI benefits, right? And it's their assets and it's their income that Social Security looks at. And that family can have accumulated up to $100,000 in their WVABLE account, and Social Security is essentially going to disregard that first $100,000, and then anything above that does start counting towards the $2,000 asset limit. Okay. One thing I wanted to include in here for future consideration, we have this child that's 5 years old, but what happens down the road? Again, we're always trying to encourage, families to think of the future. If the child once he turns adolescent, and if their goal is to further their education and do some higher education in which they may be applying for federal financial aid, know this, that as in the federal financial aid application, it's called Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That is the FAFSA. I think we all know the name of it as FAFSA. That if the family chooses to apply for FAFSA or financial aid through the FAFSA, WVABLE savings is not counted as an asset on the FAFSA form. Wanted to make sure to mention that. And then some tips as far as the enrollment goes. Again, we always encourage enrollment to start saving early so that you can allow those funds to build over time. And enrollment may be completed by the parent or the guardian as an authorized legal representative, the ALR. And then who is the ALR? I did share that slide at the very beginning that listed out who can serve as an ALR, what the relationship is to that account beneficiary. So as it relates to this scenario, what would most likely apply here is the individual is a legal guardian or conservator that's been approved by the courts, or they're the parent, they're a sibling, a grandparent, or the Social Security rep payee. So know this too, that during the time of enrollment, you will be asked as the ALR, what relationship do you have? So you may, as the parent, serve as more than one of these roles, but you would check mark the relationship that shows up higher on the list, the higher priority. So if you're a parent that's also the legal guardian, and you're also the rep payee, you're going to check mark legal guardian because it shows up higher on the list of the ALR. Okay. Another tip for the enrollment, the enrollment does ask, what makes the individual beneficiary eligible for an ABLE account. So in this instance, the child is not receiving SSI because the parent's income exceeds the income limit. So what they may choose is self-certification. That is the third option. And what this simply means is they have a physician that is certifying the disability diagnosis. Now, I have hyperlinked the physician form. This is a stable account document form that you can download, and you will print it. You'll take it to the physician, whether it be the current treating physician or the physician that provided the initial diagnosis. They're going to complete the form. You're going to keep it on hand. You are not required to upload that form within the system. Okay, you're only going to keep it on hand in case it's ever requested. And again, you're check marking self-certification. But in the instance that the child may have a condition that's listed on Social Security Administration's list of compassionate allowances condition, you heard Kim talk about that, I briefly mentioned it, then that is the second option, and you would actually check mark that as far as the eligibility, what makes them eligible for the ABLE account. And then I've also included additional benefits and features for the WVABLE stable account that I want to point out. Just these are things for you to consider. That, again, just to reiterate, funds in the ABLE account may be used at any time, now or in the future, to pay for qualified disability expenses. And essentially that would be any expense that supports that child. Okay, so education, food, clothing, school supplies, even going to the movies, even going on vacation, because that fulfills the definition for building the quality of life for the individual with a disability. So don't think of qualified disability expenses as limiting. Think of it as all the expenses that support that child, okay, and that they relate to that disability, okay? Know too that earnings from the investments grow tax-free as long as funds are spent on qualified disability expenses. Kim mentioned this too. Also know this, sometimes we have families that have started a 529 education savings account. And then when they have started this ABLE account, know that you may roll over the funds from that 529 education savings into the WVABLE account without incurring any penalties. Okay, there's forms on our website at the resources tab of WVABLE. That is where all stable account forms are located, including the rollover forms for the 529 into an ABLE account. Know this too, and this is our West Virginia legislature put this benefit in place back in 2019. This is for when the West Virginia taxpayer, so this could be the parent, a grandparent, when they are contributing into the WVABLE account, they may deduct their taxable income by that amount, of course, up to the standard contribution amount for that year. This is a huge benefit for families. So again, we have parents that are exceeding the income limit, so they're not eligible for SSI benefits, but they can benefit from contributing. Again, we're encouraging families to start when the child is young, contribute money into the stable account, allow those funds to build to $100,000 if it is their plan to apply for SSI for the child when they turn 18. But those contributions as a West Virginia taxpayer that they're making, they may qualify towards taking the West Virginia state income tax deduction. And know this is specific to WVABLE stable accounts. This does not apply if the West Virginia taxpayer is contributing to another ABLE national account that is not WVABLE stable, okay? And then know this too, this is another concern that we hear about from families, is they are concerned what happens to the funds in the ABLE account if and when the beneficiary passes. So this is another provision that our West Virginia legislature put in place in 2019, and that is there is no Medicaid clawback upon passing of the beneficiary. So if the beneficiary is under the age of 55, West Virginia Medicaid cannot claw back on the funds in the ABLE account to recoup the costs that they paid out, medical expenses that they paid out on behalf of the beneficiary. The only exception is what's called the West Virginia State Recovery, and that is when the beneficiary is 55 and older. they're living in a nursing home or receiving community-based waiver services, then the West Virginia State Recovery could kick in and capture funds that they paid out on behalf of the beneficiary. But a stable account is better protected than a standard checking or savings account because first, you can pay out any outstanding qualified disability expenses, and then whatever is left, then the West Virginia State Recovery could kick in. But here's another piece, that the West Virginia State Recovery can only kick in for the time that overlaps from the time that that account was started and the funds were put in, and then the funds during that time that Medicaid paid out on behalf of the beneficiary. So those time periods have to overlap, and that would be the funds that would be available for the West Virginia State Recovery. But to back up, there is not a West Virginia State Recovery for individuals under the age of 55 when the beneficiary passes, and that is in our state law. Okay. Another really important feature that I want to mention is the gifting tool feature. This is specific to stable account. This is when you are logged into your stable account, you will see this icon for gifting tool. You'll click on it, and basically you are generating a link. Okay, so whether it's birthdays, Christmas, graduation, or if you're saving for a specific item, okay, you can create this link and you can share it with family and friends, whether it be via text or email or even on social media. So it kind of functions as a GoFundMe, okay, but there's no fee. But the recipient of that link is going to click on it, and it's going to allow them to make a direct contribution from their account into the stable account. So two things, we know that those gifts are not considered income, okay, so it doesn't count against the beneficiary for means-based income test, and also the asset. Once the funds are in there, people don't have to worry that they're going to exceed the $2,000 asset limit. Again, funds in the ABLE account is a sheltered resource. Okay. So lots of information. There's probably even more key takeaways for this scenario, but these were the ones that we wanted to make sure to point out to help provide some tips and guidance for families that might be in this particular scenario. Okay.
All right, so let's transition into scenario 2. So we're going to grow up here as we're going to start with a child. And in scenario 2, we're going to talk about adolescents or transitioning youth. So in this, we have an 18-year-old who has Down syndrome. The child, the adult now, lives with mom. Mom also receives SSI due to a disability. The adolescent themselves is currently receiving SSI. So some things that we're going to question and hopefully answer these questions to are: what is an age 18 redetermination? How does SSA define disability for an adult? What are the income resource limitations for SSI? What are health insurance options in this scenario? What is a representative payee? We've kind of already alluded to that, so we're going to go in a little deep on that. And what are the key benefits of a WVABLE for an adolescent? So in this scenario, we already know that both of these individuals receive SSI. We're specifically talking about the 18-year-old. So if they're already receiving SSI, what happens at that pivotal point of 18? Well, at the age of 18, Social Security considers an individual now an adult. So at this time, if you are currently receiving SSI as a minor, a child, we have to do a full review of your income, your living arrangements, your resources, and then we also have to determine if you are going to be continued and seen as disabled by Social Security rules as an adult now. We're no longer going to be looking at parents' income if that was a factor before. In this case, it was a factor. So when we do this review, it's called an age 18 redetermination. So you may have actually know somebody, or you yourself have been through this process. If you had a child who was with disabilities, approached the age of 18, was receiving SSI. At 18, we now look at them an adult, and we have to make all those new decisions again. So that's an important factor. If the child has an ABLE account, We're going to look at that as well. Now, what happens if they don't receive? I just want to give you the alternate to this. Even though in our example they are currently receiving, we do the age 18 redetermination. But in our first scenario, that child wasn't eligible due to the income guidelines, so they weren't receiving. Well, now at 18, this is the time to apply for benefits. So you can apply for Social Security disability and or SSI. For disability, you have to be insured on your own work record. You have to meet the disability rules, or you may be eligible on a parent's record. This is called a childhood disability benefit. So this is for individuals who has a parent or parents receiving retirement or Social Security disability. And this child who is now 18, if they were determined disabled by DDS prior to the age of 22, and they meet all the other conditions, they could receive on a parent's record. You don't need to worry about that. We ask all those questions when we're, whether it's an age 18 redetermination or a brand new claim, we always ask those questions, okay? For SSI purposes, during this application, we're going to look at, is the individual disabled? Do they meet the income and resource guidelines? And what's their living arrangement? Where they live could also determine eligibility, okay? And again, reiterate, at this point, we're no longer considering parents' income or assets. So the definition for a disability for Social Security as an adult is defined as a person who is unable to work due to a condition that is, or conditions, it can be a combination, that is expected to last 12 months or longer, or is terminal. Or the medical condition is preventing an individual from working substantial gainful employment, work that they did in the past, and it's preventing them from being able to adjust to other types of work. Okay, so there is the potential a person could be working and eligible for SSDI or SSI, okay? But we do have to look at something called substantial gainful activity. And we're going to get into that more in our third scenario. So we will bypass that for right now. This is the listing. Remember the Social Security Blue Book? This is the listing for the adults. The listing of impairments is there. Now, even if I hadn't mentioned that in our scenario that the 18-year-old with Down syndrome was receiving SSI, I could have told you she was receiving SSI with the first three statements. She was 18, or the individual, we don't know if it was, I don't remember if it was a boy or girl, can't remember. But anyways, age 18, diagnosed, had Down syndrome, lived with mom who was also receiving SSI payments. Now, SSI payments, that's an indicator that, mom had limited income and resources as well. But having the diagnosis of Down syndrome, that is considered a presumptive condition. For SSI, there are certain types of conditions that lead to what we call a presumptive payment or expedited payment. So if you have something that's listed on this condition, when we take your application, if you meet the income and resource guidelines and you have one of these conditions, we immediately start paying you your SSI payments while Disability Determination Services makes the confirmation that you are disabled by our rules. The reason we do that is these conditions are highly probable that you will be approved, okay, for disability. So it's called a presumptive payment or an expedited payment. Down syndrome is one that is listed on that. So if the 18-year-old, the adult, meets the income and resource guidelines, they would start receiving presumptive payments based on that condition until DDS makes the medical decision. So I wanted to briefly bring that up, and the information is hyperlinked in this slide for you. But the conditions as an adult are listed here as well. Again, they're under that blue book. So we also mentioned during the age 18 redetermination that could this person manage their benefits on their own? Can they manage their SSI payments independently. So what is a representative payee? Well, a child receiving benefits as a minor under the age of 18 has to have a representative payee. This is an individual, it could be an agency, organization, or an institution that is selected to manage your Social Security or SSI payments on your behalf. Okay? It's behalf of an individual that's either a minor, someone that is incapable of managing their benefits, or an individual that is declared by the courts as legally incompetent. In the state of West Virginia, we deem them as a protected person. Now, Social Security is the only organization that uses the phrase or terminology of representative payee. Okay, you're not, the other agencies and organizations don't use that. They may refer to that as a fiduciary, someone that manages someone's accounts. So it's a title that it's only used in the Social Security world. So just be aware of that. Well, during the age 18 redetermination, we would interview the individual and determine whether or not this person can manage their benefits directly. We would ask them if they know their bills. We would ask them if they know how much they're receiving in payment. If we're ask them if they know how to pay a bill or direct somebody into managing that payment for them. If they can tell somebody how to pay that bill, it's an indication they can manage their benefits directly. If not, if they can't, if we really feel that they're not able to manage that monthly payment received from Social Security, we may still have to keep a representative payee on record for them. Of course, I had already mentioned that for children under the age of 18, they need a representative payee. If an adult is declared a protected person in the state of West Virginia or determined incompetent by a court of law, they have to have a representative payee. And then adults who Social Security decides if a person is incapable of managing their benefits or directing someone else to manage their payments, we decide that person's capability and if they need a representative payee or not. I want to highlight here, it is important to understand that a lot of individuals do get this confused. They think if they have power of attorney or they're a legal guardian that they're automatically have the rights to manage someone's benefits or they should automatically be selected as a representative payee. That is not always the case, okay? So being power of attorney or legal guardian or having a joint bank account is not the same thing as being a representative payee. It is an interview you have to do with Social Security, and the person has to be selected, or the organization has to be selected to serve as representative payee, put on the record in that format, okay? Now, being that representative payee only entitles the payee to manage the Social Security benefits or the SSI benefits, okay? It doesn't give them permission or entitlement to manage other types of funds for that individual. We make sure they're responsible for managing Social Security payments and SSI payments. I do want to add, though, the WVABLE or ABLE accounts, a representative payee is an approved entity to manage or control that account on behalf of an individual who needs that assistance. So they certainly have the right by Social Security rules to be the ALR on that ABLE account. Okay, some key takeaways here on this scenario is that an ABLE account is an approved banking account for Social Security payments, whether they have a representative payee or not. Okay, so if we determine this 18-year-old is capable of managing funds, they can use the ABLE account to deposit their SSI payments into that account. It is an approved bank account. A representative payee, whether an individual or organization, can use that ABLE account to manage Social Security or SSI payments, which we just talked about. This is key. If a current representative payee is managing an ABLE account and can no longer continue to serve as representative payee, sometimes those things happen, then a newly appointed representative payee can work with their local Social Security office to become the new ALR for that same ABLE account. Okay, they do need to coordinate with their Social Security office making sure that that's, okay by us to give permission to do that. But they should not have to close out the ABLE account, return the funds, and start a new ABLE account just because we changed the representative payee. So they do have the right to do that. I want to make sure that's clear because we have had that scenario come up in the past. Another key takeaway is a person who receives even just $1 in SSI payment is eligible for the Medicaid health insurance. Sometimes people don't realize that the SSI payment and Medicaid, they do correlate. If you receive one, you receive the other. So I wanted to make sure we haven't talked a lot about the health insurance aspect here, but I wanted to bring that up. And then receiving SSI provides recipients access to services like vocational rehabilitation and other health and employment support agencies. So it can open the doors to other types of services that might be of assistance for the individual. Roxanne's going to go over some key takeaways here for the this scenario when it concerns WVABLE.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. Those are great takeaways. These are the things that Kim mentioned are things that I hear in the field and from rep payees or parents. So really appreciate Kim just really providing those key takeaways and providing some clarification there as it relates to Social Security policy, especially when the rep payee changes. And if that rep payee is managing an ABLE account or the ALR, what the process is and what Social Security allows. And I'm just going to reiterate this just because we hear it in the field, in that you can work with the Social Security office, as Kim mentioned, to switch over the ALR to the new rep payee so that you're not returning those funds and then having to return those funds back into a new ABLE account. And that has so many stipulations and things. So we're really fortunate that Social Security is going to work with the folks to allow that transfer to happen, or the transfer of the ALR to happen. So here I have lots of information. Some of this applies, and I mentioned when it came to the last scenario. So I'm not going to go too much into detail. I'm just going to mention the new things that wasn't mentioned earlier. So when we have this adolescent, 18 years old, living with mom. Mom is receiving SSI, and the adolescent currently also receives SSI. I want to mention that for an instance in which that adolescent may be employed, okay, and again, or down the road, maybe they're going to be employed and they're going to receiving income that exceeds the income threshold for receiving SSI, but then in the end they're making more money, right, than what SSI benefit payment is. So for employed beneficiaries, know that they may contribute their employment earnings up to $15,060. That's the amount for 2025, and this is above the standard annual contribution limit of $19,000. That's the threshold for 2025, for a grand total of $34,060. And again, funds in the ABLE account can be used at any time to pay for qualified disability expenses. This is any expense that supports that 18-year-old. Okay, this could include education, transportation, any, going to the movies again, food, any expense that supports that 18-year-old. As far as enrollment, some tips is that 18-year-old, they are likely to decide that they want their parent or someone else to help them with the enrollment and the account management. So during the enrollment, that authorized legal representative, they're going to choose which category. So it could be, again, the legal guardian conservator, the parent, could be a sibling in this case too. It could be a grandparent or the Social Security rep payee. In this particular instance, as far as the eligibility question, because that adolescent is receiving SSI, they're simply going to check mark that the beneficiary is entitled during the current year to SSI benefits. One piece I wanted to add with this, because in this scenario, the mom is also receiving SSI due to her disability. So not sure how old the mom is, not sure when her disability onset occurred. However, we know that in order to be eligible for an ABLE account today, The onset of the disability would have had to have occurred before the age of 26. But come January 1, in just a few months, that is increasing to before age 46. So in this instance, mom could also be eligible, even if her disability didn't occur before age 21, she could be eligible for once the ABLE age goes into effect, and it's expanding eligibility for individuals whose disability occurred at a later age before the age of 46. And then some program features that I've already mentioned: the Stable Visa debit card. This is a card that's available to all stable account holders, and for WVABLE, there is no fee. WVABLE actually covers the $5 cardholder user fee on behalf of the beneficiary. In this instance, here's another tip. If the parent is managing the stable account and they have requested a card, the card is going to come in their name on behalf of the beneficiary. But they may request what's called a companion card for that 18-year-old, or if they're older, so that they can have access to the funds in the stable account. And as a reminder, this stable card is loadable. It does not pull directly from the balance of the stable account. Okay, you do have to load it. So when you log in, once you have that card in hand, it's automatically going to be linked within the stable account platform. So you're going to log in, you're going to request to make a withdrawal. You'll see that card as an option to move funds to that card. And of course, that's what you will do. Let's say you move $200. Then on another login, and this is specific for the Stable Visa debit card, you can move funds from each card. So if you have $200 on your card, you can move $100 over to the companion card to give access to those funds to the 18-year-old. Then you can set restrictions to where the card can only be used for food-related items, for example, or perhaps can only be used at certain locations like Walmart or the Dollar General. And then you can also elect to receive text alerts every time that card is swiped. A protection mechanism is that you cannot use the card at an ATM to get cash out, so you never have to worry about that. But the Stable Visa card is an excellent way for individuals that want to have access to their funds on a more frequent basis. And then, of course, it's excellent as it relates to this 18-year-old scenario where you're teaching money management skills for that individual. Know this, that at the end of 2026, this is not in place now, but by the end of the year, that Stable Invest Well, the program manager, they are working so that individuals with this account, there can be multiple users assigned to the account to access the account. So for example, in this case, we have a parent that's managing the account. If they choose, they could have the adolescent, well, in this case, the 18-year-old, added to the account to have access to help manage it. So no, that is an option that they're working towards that will be in place by the end of the year. Again, the gifting tool is another excellent feature to help the adolescent reach their savings goals. I've already discussed that in the last scenario. And then we also have the Stable Account mobile app. That is another great. So if you're adding users, so then in that case, if the parent is a user for the account, but then so is the adolescent, both of them can download the Stable Account mobile app to have access to those accounts. Now, again, the parent's going to set restrictions on the level of access, but again, that is another feature that's included and available to the account owners. Okay, moving right along.
All right, this is going fast. So let's jump into scenario 3. We have a 36-year-old with cerebral palsy, recently approved for SSI payments and has received past due benefits or back pay. And recently started working. So there's a lot here. So what are the Social Security work incentives, including Medicaid eligibility? How can an individual utilize an ABLE account to shelter SSI back pay? And what are the benefits of WVABLE for working adults, and how does WVABLE incentivize employment? So let's jump in here, and I'm hoping we can get through this. Remember resources. So I bring this up because this individual was getting back pay. Now, with that being said, Back pay for SSI purposes, if they're getting a large portion of back pay, let's say it's $5,000, that's clearly above the $2,000 asset limit, correct? So we recognize that. And for SSI, we exclude back pay as a resource for up to 9 months. So the individual has 9 months. It can stay in the bank account, it can stay in cash, things of that. But anything after that 9 month that's remaining counts as a resource. Okay. So if it's in a standard bank account or in cash, let's say they only spent $2,000 of the 5,000. There's 3,000 on that 10th month still sitting in a bank account. They will be ineligible for SSI payment in that month because they're above the $2,000 resource limit. However, if this individual opens a WVABLE account, then the money can be deposited into that account and it goes by the normal ABLE resource exclusion rules. So it's disregarded up to that $100,000 limit. So that might be something you want to think about when it comes to getting large sums of back pay and inheritance, things of that nature that could impact SSI payments. What could you do with that to protect yourself and prevent yourself from having to just, hurry up and do that spend down? Now, Social Security does have some work incentives. So this individual started working. There are employment supports to assist beneficiaries to independence. They can help you re-enter the workforce, stay in the workforce, provide you with some skills and some trainings. In addition to that, it protects their payments, okay, or healthcare benefits as well by using the work incentives within the Social Security program. SSI recipients, like in this scenario, he's starting to work, he has the opportunity to pay into Social Security for future retirement or disability benefits. So he's working towards, maybe coming off the SSI program and transitioning into Social Security program, which is not a needs-based program. There are some SSI employment supports. We have earned income exclusions. We have something called a 1619A, which is going to mean nothing to you right now. There is a Medicaid protection provision in there as well, and some income-related work expenses. Now, I've got my slides all backwards here, so I want to briefly go over these. We're running out of time, but I want to briefly mention what these are. So we're going to start from the bottom. What's an income-related work expense? Well, if an individual has to pay out of pocket for whether it's a supportive device, whether it's transportation costs or anything, medications, if they pay out of pocket for services or a product to help them be able to work, we can deduct that amount from the wages that they receive, because we do count their wages when determining their SSI payment. However, we can deduct these income-related work expenses. So there is a listing here. If Roxanne would transition to some slides in the forward. Might be stuck here. That's just a definition of what an income-related work expense is, and I've already explained that. It's where we can deduct the cost of expenses that you're paying out of pocket for in order to be able to try to work or work. So here's a listing of some ideas, some things that we can deduct. Transportation costs. If you have to get to work using a modified vehicle and you have to pay for additional services, maybe you have to take a specialized bus to your work, we can deduct that from your wages. Attendant care services, service animals, medical devices, there's a whole listing there. That's not all inclusive. So any time you have to pay out of pocket for some service or equipment, we can deduct that from your wages when determining your SSI payment amount. Also, we do not count your wages dollar for dollar. So we deduct the first $65 off of your wages, comes right off the top. If you're not receiving any other form of income other than SSI and wages, we can take another $20. It's called a general exclusion off. And then we only count the remaining half. of your earnings. So we really only count about half of the wages when determining someone's benefit SSI payment amount. Quick example. Let's say this individual we're talking about today went to work and they grossed $1,085. We're going to take $65 off of that as an earned income exclusion. They don't receive any other form of income, so we take another $20 off of that. They're down to $1,000 of wages that we're looking at. We divide that by 2. Out of the $1,085 for this individual, we're only going to count 500 of that when it comes to determining what their SSI payment will be. Because SSI payments are needs-based, other income can affect your payment. Wages is one of them. However, we have learned by people working, and we only count half those wages, individuals that work actually make and receive SSI actually make more money overall. They receive more income than just receiving SSI payments alone. So some little knowledge there for you about wages. Now, there is also something when you initially file for benefits, for disability benefits and SSI benefits, in the initial application, if you are working and you're working above $1,620 in gross wages, or for a blind individual, $2,700 in gross wages, they're not going to determine you disabled because you're working what they call substantial gainful activity. However, if you're already receiving SSI payments and you're working and your wages exceed that $1,620, it's not going to affect you as far as eligibility. We simply count it as standard wages, okay? So you're not going to lose your SSI just because you went over that $1,620. That only affects an SSI recipient at the initial application. If they're already receiving and they start work, they're protected under the 1619A from what we call substantial gainful activity. Now, the 1619B has to do with Medicaid, and I actually, I enjoy explaining this if we had more time. However, really quick, there is a ruling within SSI and Medicaid that states that if wages are the only thing that keeps an individual from receiving their SSI payment, and they have to use their Medicaid card, they have to have, they have to see their doctors, they will use their Medicaid throughout the time while they're working, they can retain their Medicaid eligibility. They can retain that Medicaid. Even though they may not be getting an SSI payment, their SSI record remains active. They're an SSI eligible person. They're just not payable because their wages might be so high, but they still can retain Medicaid as long as they will still need the Medicaid. They're still disabled and they meet the other rules there. So that's called the 1619B, Medicaid while working. The best way to go and the best resource for all the work incentives for SSDI and our SSI program is called the Red Book. You can access that through this presentation, or you can simply go on ssa.gov, type in Red Book. You can view it online, or you can have one mailed to you. But this is all the rules regarding the work incentives that are available to you when receiving SSI. Some key takeaways in this scenario: the person was 36, diagnosed disabled by Social Security, receiving SSI payments, got a large back pay, and they recently started working. There are a lot of advantages to working while receiving SSI. As I mentioned, you're paying into Social Security, so down the road you might qualify for SSDI or retirement. I also forgot to add, you're paying in to be eligible for Medicare. So that's another advantage. You do have that Medicaid eligibility provision, the 1619B that I just mentioned, where if work is the only thing preventing you from getting that SSI payment, you still are eligible for Medicaid. We count less than half of a person's wages when they do go to work towards their SSI payment. So overall, an individual receiving SSI and working earns more money overall. Now, the wages that an individual is making are still counted as income for SSI purposes. However, you can, as Roxanne mentioned, you can deposit up to that amount there that she had mentioned. I believe it was $15,060 for the year, and gross wages can be deposited into an ABLE account. They're still counted as wages and still could affect the SSI payment amount. However, once it is in the ABLE account, it is a sheltered resource up to that $100,000 balance. So there's our connection there with that ABLE account. And this person received a large sum of back pay. So that underpayment can be deposited into that ABLE account, again, to shelter it from that $2,000 resource limit once those 9 months are up, because we do exclude it up to 9 months. But that 10th month, it's counted as a resource. So you can protect that asset by putting it into that ABLE account. So, all right, we're going to turn the key takeaway over to Roxanne, and we're going to finish this up.
Yeah, real quick, we are right at 1:30. So for those of you who are still able to stick with us for a few more minutes, I'm not going to go over all of these takeaways. A lot of them I've already mentioned because they apply to the other scenarios and to this one. But what's specific for this scenario is definitely want to encourage the Able to Work Act. This is the opportunity for employed account owners to contribute their employment earnings up to $15,060 for 2025, as Kim mentioned. This is on top of the $19,000 standard contribution limit. And then they are also could be eligible for the Savers Credit. This is an IRS tax credit where they're incentivizing retirement savings for employee beneficiaries. This would be for low to middle income earners. They would qualify for the credit, again, for contributions of their employment earnings that they are contributing into WVABLE. This credit is up to $1,000 for single filers and $2,000 for married filing jointly. Again, consider the contributions from the West Virginia taxpayer. So if this adult disability, if they're earning enough to file an income state tax return in West Virginia, the contributions they make could qualify towards reducing their taxable income for West Virginia. And let's see, I'm skimming over because we are out of time, that if the individual, if they're wanting to use their ABLE account for everyday living expenses, know that one feature that is included within the stable account platform is a check withdrawal feature. And what they're doing is they are logging in and they're requesting stable to issue a check to a third party to pay for rent or their utilities, for example, or even to have a check issued to them. Those are the features that I wanted to highlight here. Many of those, again, we have already covered. So at this point, we want to open it up for Q&A. And again, for those who are able to stay with us, we do have a couple of questions that's been asked in the chat. So let me go ahead and read those and we'll start out with those. After we cover these two questions, please feel free to either enter more questions in the chat or you can unmute your microphone and you can ask your questions verbally. So when my son, now 30, began receiving the SSI, we used an account at the local bank that was opened when he was in elementary school. We were also depositing his paychecks from a developmental workshop that he attended. Someone noticed that we were doing that and said that we could not have any other monies in with SSI, even though we never exceeded the $2,000 limit. So we opened a stable account. Question: do we still need to have the separate accounts, or can we change the direct deposit for SSI to go into our stable account? So Kim, if you want to, this is a question that both of us could actually contribute to. I'll let you start.
So there's several things here that I could question, but taking it at face value, we have to see how that bank account was set up. I need to look at the bank account itself. So I can't indicate whether that individual was giving you misinformation or not. But on the basis, if the child's name was on the account and, their work and their SSI payments were going in there, that should have been fine. It all depends. You can have, in certain circumstances, if it's just their standard monthly payment, you can have what we would call the funds from wages and their SSI payment go into the same account. With that being said, though, however, since you transitioned into you opened a stable account, you certainly can have the SSI payments directed into that account. It is an acceptable account for banking purposes for Social Security. So you do have the right to do that.
Okay. Kim, just to add, the individual asking the question added it was set up as a payee account. I don't know if that changes.
No. It should have
Okay.
been fine. The only thing that would have been different is if this was something called a dedicated account, meaning your son had a large sum of back pay due. That is a whole other topic of conversation. Dedicated account funds cannot be commingled with other funds. However, based on what you're telling me, it's just monthly SSI payments and then that person's wages. That should have been fine. Okay, you shouldn't have had any issues at all. But in turn, you can still, based on your question, still deposit the SSI payment into that stable account.
Yeah. And just to add to that, you stable has the account number and the bank routing number that you need in order to set up direct deposit for Social Security benefit payments. With SSI, you can't choose to have a portion of it deposited into this external account in stable. It would have to be an all or nothing. The other piece we always want to make sure that folks are aware of is that if you are contributing additional funds into the stable account on top of SSI, if it's non-employment funds, right, then you have to be mindful of that 19,000 contribution limit. Okay. Now, if he is employment earnings, that could go into that second bucket of that $15,060, where the employment earnings would be on top of the 19. So just consider those two things as you are, but you can absolutely set up direct deposit, as Kim mentioned, for that SSI benefit payment into the stable account. I hope that answers your question, Sharon, and if not, feel free to add some more context there. We'll go on to the next. What if more than 19,000 is deposited in a stable account in a year? So first know that stable has features set up to where the account cannot exceed 19,000 contributions. So they're going to help with that piece so that the account doesn't go over that 19,000 of that standard contribution amount. Okay, Holly. Now, again, if the beneficiary is working and you want to contribute employment earnings, that would be part of the able to work contribution, and that would be notated to able to work bucket when you're making that contribution. Okay. Okay, any other questions? And this was our greatest fear, is that we would go over the time limit. I guess it's a good problem, and I know we've had some folks to drop off. Any other questions that we have before we transition over to helping to share resources for SSI and WVABLE program? Okay, if you think of questions, let's share our contact information next. And I'm going to go ahead and let Kim talk about her resources that she is sharing in her slides as well.
Sure. Well, directly related to SSI and the SSI program, SSI Spotlights is the best resource that I can offer you. So the link is provided for you in the presentation, but you can also type in SSI Spotlights on our website. As you can see, these are the topics that are listed in the Spotlights page. ABLE is down here in the middle, is the last one in the second column. So you could click on that when you're on our site, and it'll take you to all the information pertaining to ABLE accounts. But there's more information there available to you as a great resource. And then I do have some links provided here that you may find helpful, frequently asked questions and things of that nature that might be helpful as well. So feel free to use these resources. That's why Roxanne is providing the presentation for you, so you can have these available to you. These are excellent places to go for questions. Now, to contact Social Security, you can certainly do so through your My Social Security account at ssa.gov. Visit us online at that website I just gave you. call our national number, which is 1-800-772-1213. There are operators available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. We do have an automated service that's 24 hours a day. You can request an interpreter. And of course, the TTY number for the deaf and hard of hearing is there as well, 1-800-325-0778. So, and this is my contact information. My name's Kimberly Stephens. That is my email address and my phone number and extension. So if you do have a more specific question relating to your scenario, be happy to help you with that. I will say it is easier to email me than call me, but certainly feel free to do either one.
And real quick, as it relates to WVABLE resources, of course, you know we have the WVABLE.com website. That is where you go for enrollment. That's where you go to log in. That's actually where you can go to take a deeper dive into the information that was shared with you today. But know that I do monthly webinars that's open to the public. It's a great way to hop on and really let's dive deeper into those scenarios and when we talk about benefits, eligibility, how the accounts work. And then other considerations. We also have, so this is the page at the West Virginia State Treasurer's website that's dedicated to WVABLE. This is where you go to find program resources. This is where you would go to actually register for one of those monthly webinars. So here you see in the bottom, there's a button for upcoming events. That's where you actually went to register for today's webinar. This is where all of our upcoming events are posted. Program resources button is where you would go to download any flyers, brochures, documents that are specific to WVABLE program. We also have a monthly newsletter that actually just published, our September published today. This is where you would go to sign up. For anyone that did register for today's webinar, you will automatically be signed up to receive our newsletters. This ensures that you will stay up to date with all program changes and updates at the program level, at the state level, at the federal and national level. And then we also have a Facebook page that is an excellent way to stay connected, to hear these myths, clearing those myths up, misconceptions, and of course program reminders, and then where we're going to be, and perhaps we will see you out in the field at an event. This slide I created as it relates to all the programs, HUD, SNAP, Medicaid, Medicare, SSI, and then of course the ABLE Act. These are all hyperlinked to where you can go directly to those documents or websites where they're providing guidance on the treatment of ABLE accounts as it relates to their programs. And this is the contact information for reaching myself at the State Treasurer's Office. Anytime you see a 304 number, that will take you directly to me. And that is my direct email address at WVABLE. Now, if you have a question regarding an account, you've been locked out of the account, you need help to access it, or you have a question about your balance, or just something going on that's account related. I don't have access to the accounts. However, you can call the 1-800 number, and that is for stable account customer service. They are wonderful to help. And of course, they do have the hours listed there. But again, on any of our merchandise items, when you see 1-800, that goes to stable account customer service. If there's a situation where you're needing additional assistance, please feel free to reach out to me and we can get Stable on the line, or I've got some contacts with Stable and Bestwell we can certainly be of help to help mitigate. We are out of time now, 1:43. Thank you for everyone for attending. A huge thanks to Kim Stephens for giving her valuable time and sharing her expertise. We have been wanting to provide this webinar for some time now, and I'm just very gracious for Kim sharing all of that with us. We hope that it was informative. Again, if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, a copy of the PowerPoint slide will be emailed to all registered attendees. And we have recorded this webinar, so once it's available, we will include the link to the recording at the West Virginia State Treasurer's website at the WVABLE resources page. And again, thanks to Ashley for providing the ASL interpretation, and to Sherry for providing the tech support. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Have a great afternoon.
We will see you all next time. Thank you, Kim.